Now let's move to the next topic, social mobility in India. Now the next three topics that we have, they are kind of smaller. The first two topics, given that they were huge, and again they were linked with multiple parts of the syllabus, and also they were slightly more technical, we took more time. For the remaining three topics, comparatively they're small and we might not need as much time. So let's take up each of this one by one. So social mobility, it is linked with again paper 1 and some part of paper 2. In paper 1, there is a section stratification and mobility. Yes, it is relevant there. And then you have topics like vision of social change in India, industrialization, urbanization. These are all paper 2 topics. So there also it will be relevant since we are talking about India specific things. So what we will do is we'll first understand what is social mobility. Right? It's going to be kind of a refresher for you. Right? You're going to revise it. We'll look at different kinds of social mobility. Then we will see what are some findings, recent findings about social mobility in India. And then we will see what should be the way ahead. Right? What should be the policy approach of the government, union government, state governments to ensure more social mobility. So this is how the next few minutes will look like. These are the major points. So before we start, I just wanted to show you an image. So what is happening here? There are people at different levels, right? Someone is at the bottom, someone is already doing well. So this basically reflects the social hierarchy that we have. Some people are already at the top of the social hierarchy. Some people are at intermediate level. Some people are at the bottom. What is happening? People at the bottom are trying to move up. That is what social mobility is about. Social mobility means moving along the social hierarchy. But here one thing you see here is they are all helping each other. People who is at the top is helping those who is in the intermediate level, and the person who is in the intermediate level is helping someone who is at the bottom. Like this is something which is kind of cooperation between people at different social classes. That might not always be true. Social classes of status groups, etc. That might not always be true. This is kind of a very utopian, rosy picture. Now let's understand what is social mobility. Right? In layman's term, what is the meaning of social mobility? See, any topic in sociology, you should always understand it in a very simple manner. Always have a picture in your mind what social mobility is, or what alienation is, or all these different terms that you have, right? Try to have a very basic understanding of that. And on top of that, look at the different perspectives by different thinkers. Right? That way you'll have a holistic understanding of the topic. See, in a very simple way, if I have to talk about it, in the society, there exists a hierarchy. Some people are at the bottom, some people are at the top, some people will be at the intermediate level. Social mobility means people from one level moving to another level. That is social mobility. You might be born poor, but over a period of time, if you are able to improve your economic position, that is social mobility. Keep in mind, not all societies will have equal amount of social mobility. In some societies, especially for example, rural societies, people are at the bottom. It will be difficult for them to move up. You don't have enough economic opportunities. There will be different kinds of social forces which will constrain you. While in some other societies, for example, urban areas, you will have much more options for social mobility. Again, it will also depend on countries. Some countries, for example, the United States, will have massive opportunities for social mobility. The same amount of social mobility will not be allowed in some other economies. Right? So this is the layman's understanding of social mobility. So social mobility means the extent to which people are able to move between socio-economic strata during their lifetime and between generations. It reveals the degree to which an individual's starting point in life determines their chances in the future. If you are born poor and you will continue to remain poor throughout your life, then that society does not have enough money for social mobility. But if you are born poor, but there are high chances of you moving up the social hierarchy, you move into the middle classes or you move into the upper classes. That means the society has high levels of social mobility. Right? So this is the meaning of social mobility. Now, social mobility can be of different types. There can be, one type of social mobility is absolute mobility. That means whether you are better as compared to your previous generation. Offsprings are better than their parents. That is absolute mobility. And your father was in the lower middle classes and you are in the higher classes, upper classes. That is absolute mobility. Relative mobility means whether offsprings are better than their parents in terms of the position in the social hierarchy. Right? So if you are moving your position in the social hierarchy, that is relative mobility. Intergenerational mobility. Within the same generation, whether you have moved up the social hierarchy. Intergenerational mobility, whether you took more than one generation, or whether for that community, more generations were required to move up the social hierarchy. In the same generation, you cannot move up. Gradually, over a period of time, that particular group moved up the social hierarchy, socio-economic hierarchy. So, absolute mobility, your income is better than your parents' income. Relative mobility, your position in the hierarchy has changed. Intergenerational, within the same generation, your position has changed. Intergenerational, it takes multiple years, multiple generations to move up the social hierarchy. So, this is how different types of social mobilities can be there. Now, let's move to India now. We have been talking about theory. Let's look at the application. Where does India stand in terms of social mobility? So there was one study, one report, Global Social Mobility Report. According to it, India ranks among the bottom in terms of social mobility. Out of 82 countries, India is at 76th position. That means, in case of India, to a large extent, what will happen to you in future will be decided at the time of your birth. If you're born in a poor family, moving up is very difficult. If you're born in a lower caste, your position in the social economic hierarchy might not change drastically. So India does not have enough avenues for social mobility as per this report. Recently, some US-based researchers, they again looked at data from India, and they are saying that India has seen little change in the rate of upward mobility since independence. Indians born in 80s have only about as much chance of outstripping their parents in socio-economic rank as those born in the 50s. So again, upward mobility is restricted in the Indian context as per this study. And what they have done is they have looked at different socio-economic groups as well. For example, what is happening among scheduled castes? What is happening among scheduled tribes? What is happening among the forward castes? What is happening among the OBCs? Right? Whether upward mobility has increased or not. They find out that among scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, right, their situation has considerably improved after independence. Right? Whatever position they were assigned to in the social hierarchy, for scheduled caste, it has considerably improved. For scheduled tribes, some improvement is there, but not much. For forward caste and OBCs, it is more or less same. Right? Whichever position they had in the social hierarchy, which was already better, it still continues to be better. And for Muslims, it has actually fallen. That is, again, what they're pointing out. They're saying that it is a matter of concern. But keep in mind, wherever Muslims are in majority, there is scope for upward mobility. Wherever there are minorities, there the mobility has fallen. So I'll show you two charts which will help you visualize this. This is first chart, social mobility in India. This is 1950s, 60s, and this is till this point they have studied. Right? So I'll just change the marker, the color of the marker, which will help you understand better. So red is scheduled caste, the blue that you see is Muslims, green is scheduled tribes, and the grey one is forward caste and the OBCs. So if you see this y-axis is basically your position in the hierarchy, caste hierarchy. So in the 1950s, scheduled tribes are at the bottom, then Muslims, then scheduled caste, and then you have the forward caste. Right? So this is how the rank used to be. They have looked at different parameters and they have tried to create that hierarchy. Now look at scheduled caste. Right? So again, their rank was somewhere in between 30 34. Over a period of time, things have changed. Right? Somewhere 37, 38, their rank is now. So there's upward trajectory. For scheduled tribes also, look at the green one. Right? There is also slight upward trajectory, but not as much as for scheduled caste. For the forward caste, for the OBCs, again, it is more or less same, or it is gradually slightly decreasing. So position in 1950s and 80s more or less same, upward mobility levels. For Muslims, it has gone down. So this is what their study points out. Another way to look at it, and you can look at all India data, right? So more green, the concentration, that means chances of upward mobility is high. More red means chances of upward mobility is low. So you can find out that these regions are more green. That means chances of upward mobility is high. This region, lighter green, red, etc., chances of upward mobility is less. Note one thing, this region, Haryana, Jammu Kashmir, here also upward mobility is high. Even if you have larger Muslim population, but they are in majority, upward mobility rates are high. So this is the region where chances of your moving the social hierarchy is restricted, and this is again a cause of concern. Right? Why it is restricted? Host of factors maybe. Right? You do not have enough economic opportunities. Economy is not open. Your caste and other identities might be very strong. Educational outcomes might not be good. All these things might be leading to this situation. So southern India is performing better in terms of social mobility as compared to the northern, the central part of India. So this is what is the finding. Now the question is, what needs to be done? What can be some of the policy implications? Right? We have an idea about mobility now, social mobility in different parts of India. So if you are the government, what all you should be considering, what all you should be doing. First thing, focus on geographic mobility, movement of people from one place to another. Again, this is something which is what we covered in the first topic, right? Improve geographic mobility, promote migration, movement of people from rural to urban areas, movement of people from one state to another. All these things will lead to economic development. All these things will help people. It will also have businesses, right? Promote geographic mobility, change the political discourse. What is happening in the political discourse? Many states now they're trying to restrict this. They will have policies for reservation for people from their own state. This should not be the case. This is basically going backwards. That should not be the case. Improve equality in education, access to education, affordability of education, quality of education needs to improve. In higher education also, try to ensure that you have enough diversity. People who are from the lower socioeconomic communities who are at the lower socioeconomic hierarchy, they should have preferential access, they should be provided access to education. Education is something which helps people move up the social hierarchy. Invest in youth. Different kind of schemes, different kind of incentives should be provided to the private players so that they take up interns, they take up apprentices. Paid internship should be promoted. All these things can lead to higher economic situation, higher socioeconomic situation over a period of time. Right? There should be dedicated career pathways from internship to job. Try to promote all these things. Different kind of social safeguards are required. There are certain communities which are lagging behind. We already saw Muslims, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, right, as compared to other communities. So some form of social protection is required. Right? Again, depends on the community what kind of protection you provide. Some form of benefits have to be provided, maybe cash transfers or something. And then try to leverage the markets as well. Right? The private player might have a role to play here as well. Right? If there are certain private players who are having a diverse workforce, right, who are employing people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, they should be rewarded. Some form of incentives can be provided, tax relief can be provided. Right? So leverage the power of the corporate sector as well. So all these things can possibly be the solutions. All these things can possibly lead to higher social mobility in the Indian context. So this is about social mobility, or rather the lack of social mobility in India, and what can be done about it. So there is one question here. What do you mean by social mobility? Suggest measures to improve social mobility in India. Right? So here you can talk about the meaning of social mobility. Here you can talk about the different dimensions of social mobility. You can also talk about where does India stand in terms of social mobility. Right? All these things you can talk about. And in the second part, right, all the measures that we talked about, right? So social protection, corporate accountability, corporate responsibility, how do you leverage private sector, right? How do you ensure that education is accessible? How do you ensure that you are investing in the youth who are again going to be the future? All these points you can talk about. Also, one more thing you can do is you can also talk about some policies which are already there, right? Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, or policies for promoting education, Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. All these things also you can add here. So this is about social mobility in the Indian context. So we'll move to the next question, but before that, if you have any questions, okay, I don't see any new questions. Sri Deepika says one of the reasons for upward trajectory is because of reservation. Yes, exactly, right? Reservation in education, reservation in jobs, they have played a role, right? Affirmative action has helped people move up the social hierarchy. And again, many states have their own policies, different schemes are there, not just reservation, different policy schemes are also there. For example, tribal schools and other things which have also helped move up. Yeah, 200 words. All the questions that I'm giving today, 200 words. Now, okay, now we're moving to the next topic, that is the time study of suicide. Before I move into the topic, I just want you to guess what this image is all about. There's this image you can see on the screen. Any idea? What is this? What is this? How are they linked with the study of suicide? You can just type your answer in the chat window. Any idea who are these? If you have read about suicides, if you have read about the Times theory of suicide, you will get an idea. Who are these? I mean, I'm just giving you a hint. This photo is from World War II, and these people are Japanese. Soldiers, everyone was there, soldiers. Yeah, Ashok gets it right. They're suicide bombers. Dede also has got it correct. Japanese Air Force pilots, World War II, but I gave you the hint already. So Ashok gets the point. Dede doesn't get the point. Puranjay says soldiers getting punishment. No, they're not getting punishment. It's the other way around. I mean, they're actually doing something which is good, considered good for the society. Not samurais, Guru. So they are basically kamikaze pilots. Now, these pilots, they were suicide bombers, as Ashok pointed out. So what they used to do was, they used to attack the targets with their own planes. So they knew that they are going to die in the process. So they will just go and crash against their enemy targets. So they are actually acting as bombs. So what is happening here is, they are committing suicide. Why they're committing suicide? For a greater cause for them, right? For what is the greater cause? They are basically fighting for Japan, fighting for their own people. And again, I'm not going into that, the morality of war and other things, but from their perspective, they were doing something good for their community. So what I wanted to say here is, these are suicide bombers from the time of World War II, and they are kamikaze pilots, and these suicide bombers, the kind of suicide they're committing is one type of suicide that we're going to discuss. Right? So the next topic is suicides. There are different kinds of suicide. One kind of suicide is the suicide these people used to commit. So the next few minutes, what all we are going to cover, we will try to understand suicide, the Durkheim's theory of suicide, what it means. We will try to understand what are the different types of suicide, and then we will link it up with the last 2 years. The last 2 years, there is data to point out that the number of suicides has increased, not only in India, world over. How can we link the Durkheim's theory of suicide with the number of suicides, the increase in number of suicides that have happened in the last 2 years? Right, that linkage we are going to see. So let's understand suicide and Durkheim's understanding of suicide. Durkheim, he defines suicide. He's understanding suicide, but for understanding suicide, he's using a very methodological approach. What he's doing is, first he's defining what is a suicide. Then he is going and collecting data about suicides. That all those kind of deaths which are falling under his definition of suicide, he is gathering. From that, he is now trying to create a framework. He's trying to create some form of generalization. He's trying to create a law. And from that, he is now finding out the factors which cause suicide. And how it will be helpful? If you're able to understand the factors which cause suicide, in future what you can do, address these factors, number of suicides will fall down. So what is happening here? He is actually doing a scientific study of suicide. And this is something which is kind of novel. It is new at that point of time. In science, what do? You first look at things, you observe things around you, then you try to understand what might be causing this. You try to create a law around it, you generalize it. When you are generalizing it, you create a law, and that law can be used to forecast. I'll give you an example. Newton, he is sitting under a tree. He sees that an apple is falling down. He observes this. He observes that an apple fell down. Then what he does? He carries out different kinds of experiments. He now wants to generalize things. He's going and throwing an object from a tower, from the first floor, second floor, third floor. He observes that everything falls down. Things are not going up, they're falling down. From that, he now creates a law. He generalizes that there exists law of gravity. So in the future also, if you throw something from top, it will fall down. You are able to forecast, you are able to predict. This is what is called a scientific method. And this is what Durkheim is applying in his study of suicides. So he is now defining what is suicide first. All deaths resulting directly or indirectly from a positive or negative act of the victim himself, which he knows will produce the result. That is suicide. So if someone knows that if he or she carries out this activity, it will lead to his death, and he's carrying it out, that is suicide. It can be positive, it can be negative. It can be an act of commission, it can be an act of omission. For example, if a person takes a knife and stabs himself, he knows if you stab oneself, you will die. You will harm yourself and there will be bleeding and you will die. You are committing this act. It's a positive act. It's an act of commission. It is suicide. I know that if I don't eat food, if I starve myself, if I sufficiently starve myself, if I don't eat food for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, eventually I will die. So in this case, what is happening? It is an act of omission. It's a negative act. I was supposed to eat food, I didn't eat food. It's a negative act of omission. I'm omitting food from my life. I know without food, I will die. So both these acts will be considered to be suicide. So if a victim, a person knows that his committing this act or his not committing this act will lead to his death, that act is called as a suicide. So this is how Durkheim defines suicide. Now after this, what he does, he is now collecting data from different countries, like Spain, Germany, Britain, France, etc. He's looking at some 26,000 cases. And now he tries to link this with different kind of social facts, age, religion, sex, occupation, military service, etc. These 26,000 numbers of suicide that is there, right? He's trying to find out, is there any linkage between age and suicides? If people are older, is there higher chance of committing suicide? If among males do you have higher chance of committing suicide, or among females you have higher chance of committing suicide? Among Protestants you have more suicide, or Catholics you have more suicide, or Jews you have more suicide? He's looking at that trend. He's doing all these level of analysis. Now why he is doing this? See, until this point of time, it was thought that suicide is something which is very personal. But he feels that suicide need not be personal. Suicide might be influenced by society. In the society, there might be different kinds of social currents which might be forcing people to commit suicide. He thinks that suicide is a social fact. The suicidal currents, genetic currents, they exist within the society. So there might be some societies where the tendency to commit suicide is higher. There might be some societies where it is lower. He is trying to find this, and he is successful. Right? He finds that among males, you have more suicide rates as compared to females. Among Protestants, you have more suicide as compared to Catholics. Among bachelors, spinsters, those who are not married, suicide rates are high. Among developed regions, suicide rates are high. Right? So he is now realizing that the social group you are part of, that might have a bearing on suicide rates. So what he is saying is, he's coming up with this theory that suicide rates are dependent or they're related to social solidarity. They are dependent on two factors: social integration and social regulation. We'll look at each of these one by one. Right? Don't worry, we'll look at each of these one by one. See, his entire theory is suicide is a social fact. What is a social fact? Social fact is something which exists in the society, which exists outside the individual, which has the capacity to constrain on an individual's behavior, which can force an individual to behave in a particular manner. That is social fact. It is not something which is dependent on an individual. It has its own independent existence. For example, in certain communities, there are higher chances of committing suicide. The society is such. It will force people to commit suicide. Who is committing suicide? Again, this is much more of an individual thing. But every society has a quota of suicides. These many people will commit suicide. One society will have higher number of suicides, another society will have lesser number of suicides. But who are those individuals who will be forced to commit suicide? It will again depend on a host of individual factors. This is what he is finding out. Suicide is a social fact. The rate of suicide differs from society to society. And when the rate of suicide changes, most likely the society has also changed. I'll just give you an example. See, there are many different places in India, but you will find more number of suicides in a particular region. For example, in the Vidarbha region of Maharashtra, you will find more suicides. In Kota, for example, Rajasthan, you will find more suicides. Right? Student suicides are quite high in Kota region. In Vidarbha region, farmer suicides are quite high. What is the reason for it? In these societies, the student community in Kota, maybe, there are certain factors which are leading to higher number of suicides. Maybe there are 1,000 students over there. Maybe 5 people committed suicide over there. So these 5 people, why they committed suicide and remaining 995 people did not commit suicide? Maybe this is dependent on individual factors, right? Different people might have different capacity to cope up with stress. Similarly, in Vidarbha region, maybe suicide rates are very high as compared to suicide rates among farmers in other places. But why those X number of farmers committed suicide in Vidarbha region? They, again, individual factors might be different. Right? So suicide is a social fact. Individual factors are important, but societal factors are also important. They might be driving individuals to suicide. So this is what he is trying to find out. And he says there are basically two factors at play. One is social integration, second is social regulation. In some societies, people are closely bonded, right? Strong bonds exist between the individual and the society. That is called social integration. In some societies, these bonds might be weaker. So depending on the strength of the bond, suicide rates can vary. Societal regulation, social regulation. How many restraints are imposed by society on individuals? In some societies, a lot of restraints will be there. In some societies, the restraints might be less. So depending on the constraints imposed on individuals, the suicide rates might also vary. Now, if we take both these factors into consideration, it will look like this. Right? So on the y-axis, you have integration. If you have high level of integration, you can have high suicides. If you have less integration, then also suicide rates can be high. X-axis shows a regulation. If a lot of constraints are imposed on individuals, it can also lead to high suicides. If no regulation is there, it can also lead to suicides. Now I'll explain each of this one by one. Let's take the example of low level of integration. He finds out that among Protestants, the level of suicides is low as compared to Catholic. Now he tries to understand this. Why among Protestants, the level of the rate of suicides is low? See, among Catholics, right, the church is strong, they're close knit. But Protestantism talks about individual freedom, individualism. They're not strongly held together. So integration is less. An individual might be lonely, might not find much meaning in his life, might not be connected with others. It can lead to high level of suicides, loneliness and other things. Doesn't understand what is the linkage between him and the larger thing. It doesn't really, he feels that it doesn't really matter to the society whether he survives or not. Those kind of suicides are egoistic suicide, less level of integration. Sometimes the level of integration is extremely high. And it might so happen that an individual in that society wants to do something better for the society. That individual might feel that if he survives, it is at the cost of others. For example, let's say there's a small society, resources are limited. There are, let's say, 12 members, but food is there for only 10 members. The 11th member, the 12th member, the old members maybe, they think that we have already lived our life. But if we are taking up resources now, if we continue to survive, the younger generation might not have enough food. So for the greater good, they might kill themselves so that the younger ones have enough resources because they already have seen their own lives. You know, last year during the pandemic, when ICU ventilators were not there were some instances where older people, they said that, okay, we have lived our life, we don't need ventilator support, give it to some young folks. This can be an example of altruistic suicide, by the way. The kamikaze fighter pilots, they are also an example of altruistic suicide. What they're doing, they are killing themselves for the other members of the community so that they can survive, they can live their life. Other members will survive. They're fighting for Japan so that they become victors in the war. Again, they were not victors, that's the other thing, but that is why they were committing suicide. So depending on the level of integration, high integration as well as low integration, both can lead to high number of suicides. Similarly, regulation. If there is too much regulation, people's life is extremely controlled. It can lead to fatalistic suicides. For example, slaves in the past, right? So their life was heavily controlled by their masters, every aspect of their life. So they used to commit suicides. Right? Everything, right? They can't do anything on their own. Their masters used to force them to do this, to do that. They can't live their own life. So that is an example of fatalistic suicide. Another kind of suicide is anomic suicide. If in a society there is no regulations, or all of a sudden the society changes and the regulations change. Usually whenever we have political crisis, whenever we have economic crisis, the regulations are changing or regulations are becoming extremely low. That can lead to an anomic situation. People don't understand what they need to do. All of a sudden, there are no norms to govern them. They find it difficult to understand where they are. This can lead to anomic suicide. Right? So these are the different types of suicide. Whenever you have this economic crisis, you usually have this anomic suicide. So again, all these things are already there in your hand, in your in the PPT that we have sent to you. Right? So the OneDoc that has been sent to you, the PDF that has been sent to you. Now, how all these things are linked with COVID-19? Right? During the pandemic, there was an increase in the number of suicides. In US, the COVID helplines, the suicide helplines that are there, they reported 300% increase in the number of calls. In India also, this is National Crime Records Bureau data. In India also, massive increase in the number of suicides are reported among students, among professional persons, among unemployed persons, everyone. So, how can we understand these suicides using the GANS framework? That is what we are going to attempt now. But before that, let's see what happened during the pandemic. Because of the pandemic, socio-economic, political upheaval was there. Our society changed, our economy changed, everything, right? A lot of people were out of jobs, high job insecurity was there, people's salaries were reduced, different kinds of discrimination also was there. People who used to have COVID were discriminated against. In fact, frontline workers were also discriminated against. Different kinds of conspiracy theories came up, how the disease emerged and other things. Different kinds of misinformation was also spread. Fake news used to be spread. Have this COVID will be taken care of. Polarization also increased, right? So distrust, violence, all these things increased during the pandemic. What I'm saying is norms, regulations are also changing. So how it might have an impact on the suicide rates. So I'll take some 3-4 minutes here because this is kind of interesting. One second. Yeah. Right. So once again, I think we have missed one slide. Yeah. So let's understand how these things would have led to different kinds of situations. Now, first thing, during the pandemic, the norms and regulations changed. For example, quarantine norms, social distance, social isolation, social distancing, these kinds of norms were initiated. Now, how will this have an impact? Quarantine, right? You are increasing the norms. You have to follow quarantine rules. You have to follow social distancing. You have to follow social isolation, etc. So the number of regulations are now changing. If the number of regulations change, what will happen? Again, fatalistic society, people might move into that direction. Apart from that, people had to live in isolation. Right? You cannot move out. There were lockdown and other restrictions were there. So if you are isolated, if you cannot move, if you cannot be with other members of the society, the regular interactions that you have, right? You're meeting colleagues, you're meeting your family friends, you're meeting someone in the market or the joggers park, etc. So if that is not happening, what will happen? Your integration levels will go down. If the integration levels go down, what will happen? Chances of egoistic suicide might increase. Similarly, chances of altruistic suicide might also increase. Right? Some people, the example of ventilators and other things, right? People might give up their life for someone else. If you think that the number of resources limited to save the COVID patients is less, people might give up their lives. So it can lead to increasing altruistic suicide. Another way to look at it. See, because of the pandemic, the norms, regulations, all these things changed. People faced different kinds of hardships. Job insecurity increased, wages decreased. A lot of people lost their jobs. It is creating anomie, and anomie leads to anomic suicide. So all these things are happening, and all these things could have been the reason why the number of suicides shot up. Now the question is, what can be done? What are all some of the measures to prevent economic suicides? Those suicides which were fueled by economic crisis. Maybe some form of financial net could have been provided. To prevent altruistic suicides, people thinking that they will give up their life for others, that others deserve it more. Maybe some form of mental health counseling can be provided to them. Right kind of information can be provided to them. Public health management could have been better. You could have reduced the stigma. Then, for reducing egoistic suicide, people are feeling lonely, alone, and that's why they're committing suicide. For them, maybe you could have provided some form of community support. Other members of the community could have reached out to them. Civil society organizations could have played a role here. Then, apart from that, the different kinds of regulations that were there, quarantine, social isolation, social distancing, etc. All these things are leading to higher level of regulation, which could have led to fatalistic suicides, right? So, for all these situations, to reduce fatalistic suicides, maybe you could have provided the rationale why these regulations are there. You could have provided beforehand when these regulations will be coming down. So, if all these things would have been communicated, maybe the fatalistic suicides would have been taken care of. So, the idea here is all those different factors leading to suicides, integration as well as regulation. This is something that we can look at, right? What happened during the time of the COVID, right? Whether integration increased, whether regulation increased, what happened for different kinds of groups, and for each of these things, what could have been done. That is what we are trying to do here, right? So the kind of study of suicide, link it with the present context, right? In exam, they might ask you something like this, because suicide has been asked n number of times, but suicide in the present context might not have been asked. In the past, they've asked about student suicides, but overall COVID-19 suicides, pandemic-related suicides can be thought about in this manner. So this is about the kind of study of suicide. There is one question: discuss the kind of argument on suicide, analyze the high suicide rates in Indian society using the kind of argument. Right. So both these aspects I've already talked about. Only thing is you have to put all these things together. You should be able to answer it within 200 words. Right. So putting all these things together and answering it is slightly difficult than just understanding it. Right. So take it up. So the last topic, I know we have already exceeded the time limit, but it's a small topic. We'll just wrap it up within 10 minutes, and then I'll take the questions. I see 1 or 2 questions out there. We'll cover that question after this topic. So the next topic is alienation. Again, part of sociological thinkers. Many thinkers have talked about alienation, but a prominent thinker who talks about alienation and who is part of our syllabus is Karl Marx. And this is also relevant from work and economic life perspective. So what we will do is, we'll first look at the concept of alienation. Then we will see what are the different perspectives given by different thinkers. And then we will link alienation with COVID-19. Because COVID-19 has disrupted our work and economic life. It might have increased alienation. So any topic that you are studying now, try to link it with the present context. That's what we will try to do. So what is the meaning of alienation? Alienation means being alienated. Alienation means being separated. You're separated from something. That is alienation. Karl Marx, he has looked into alienation, and he says that as structures of society change, alienation changes. The way societies are structured, they can lead to alienation. And he says that in capitalistic society, you have maximum amount of alienation. He's saying that the producer can get divorced from the means of production, and the dead labor dominates living labor. Dead labor is basically capital, money. It starts dominating the worker, the laborer, the living person. This is what alienation looks like. Now, to understand it better, I will give you some context. Marx says, in capitalistic society, alienation happens at 4 levels. In capitalist society, what happens? There's a capitalist who invests money, and the workers, they work, and they produce different kinds of products. Now, in this society, the worker is producing a product. But once that product has been produced, the capitalist will sell the product. The capitalist is not going to ask the worker what needs to be done with the product, who the worker wants to sell the product. So the worker is producing something, but eventually it is the capitalist who decides what needs to be done with the product, and he sells it somewhere else. So the worker is now alienated from the product. Next thing, alienation from the process is also happening. Alienation from the production process is also happening. How production takes place. Who decides what needs to be produced? Who decides how things will be produced? It's the capitalist who decides all these things. The worker does not have any say in that. So this entire process of production, it is separate from the worker. The capitalist decides everything. So there is alienation from the production process. All the decisions are taken by the capitalist. The worker does not have anything to say here. Next thing, the worker is also alienated from himself. There is species alienation. They mean the same thing. Now, what is the meaning of this? According to Marx, human beings have creative ability. They can create new things with the help of their labor. They create new things, different things. And this creativity distinguishes humans from animals. Animals might not have that creative instinct. So human beings in the past, right, they used to create things, whatever they're creating, whatever product they have created, it reflected their intellectual ability, right? They're trying to give image to something. But in a capitalistic society, what is happening? The worker is creating something as per the instruction of the capitalist. He's not creating something which is a reflection of his. So he is basically working for someone else. He is losing his own human capacity, human quality. Human's capacity is creating new stuff, being creative. But that is not what is happening. In fact, he says no animal works for its own survival at others' bidding. So man's position in capitalist society is worse than animals. This is what Marx says. Animals basically work for themselves. They want to have their own food. They will fight for it. They will do all sorts of things for it. But human beings are working for someone else. So human beings' position is worse than that of animals. That is what Marx points out. And he says alienation from people is also happening in capitalist societies. In capitalist societies, social relations are not even important. Everything is market relations. So you are just treated as a commodity. You are not treated as an individual. You are not treated as a social being. You are just treated as one commodity. You are just treated as one of the factors of production. So alienation is happening at all these levels. Alienation from product, alienation from process, alienation from himself, alienation from the society. So this is how Marx visualizes it. And he says that as societies change, level of alienation also changes. He says in primitive communism, there was no alienation. But in capitalist society, the level of alienation is at its peak. Right? So this is what he says. But again, as I always mention, this is what Marx says. Don't consider it to be the gospel truth. right? There can be other perspectives as well. Right? Maybe this is how he views things. Maybe part of it is true. There can be other viewpoints as well. Right? So let's look at some other viewpoints. Weber also talks about alienation. He says yes, alienation is there. It is a hallmark of capitalistic societies, but it is not because of all the things that Marx talks about. He says alienation is there because of predominance of bureaucratic organizations and rationalization of societies. Societies are becoming more rational. They are now focusing on increasing efficiency, calculability, predictability, and different kind of relations that are there. You have mostly informal relations now. The focus is on increasing efficiency, and you have large-scale bureaucratic organizations, and all these organizations are working as per norms, rules, regulations, and these rules, regulations are based on efficiency. All these things, all the rules, regulations that are there, they are all directed towards increasing efficiency. So that is the reason you have these imposed rules, regulations, and as a result of which people are just mere cogs in this giant machinery, and that is the reason human qualities might be getting destroyed. Right? So predominance of bureaucratic organizations, impersonal rules, regulations, rationalization of social life, that is the reason for alienation. C. Wright Mills has a different perspective. C. Wright Mills says that in modern economies, you have the tertiary sector. There is predominance of tertiary sector, there is predominance of services sector. Look at India as well, right? Even though India is not a modern economy, but large predominance of service sectors there. And if you look at the Western economies, developed economies, the services sectors are dominant. So the very nature of the services sector leads to alienation. Now, why is it so? In services sector, what do? You deal with people. Person who is a waiter in a restaurant, he's dealing with people. Different people are coming, customers are coming, he has to serve them. A person who is a cabin crew, an air hostess, right? Every day she has to deal with people. A person who is a receptionist at a hotel, he has to interact with people throughout the day. So you have to have right kind of skills to deal with persons. In the past, or in the manufacturing sector, you have to have skills with things. How to operate a lathe machine, how to operate different kinds of machines. That's what you need to understand or learn. But in services sector, you have to deal with people. And when you are dealing with people, you have to put on a different kind of personality. Your personality, the kind of personality that you put on yourself when you're dealing with your customers, that is different from the personality that you actually have. In your home, you might have had different kind of issues. But when you're interacting with people at your workplace, you have to deal nicely with them. You have to smile when you talk. You have to be polite with them. If let's say I'm having a breakup with my girlfriend and I'm a hotel receptionist, might be, I'm having a bad time going through that breakup, I cannot show that thing to my customers. I have to, again, whenever there's a customer in my hotel, I have to smile, I have to talk nicely with them. An air hostess, right? At her home, multiple issues might be going on. Her father might be sick. Her kids might not have had food in the morning. But when she is meeting her customers within the airline, she has to smile with them, smile at them. She has to be nice with them. So you have to put on different kind of personalities. You are selling your personality, and as you are selling your personality, there might be alienation, right? So there is now a personality market. That is what C. Wright Mills says. Now Herbert Marcuse has a different perspective. Herbert Marcuse says that in modern economies, both work and leisure alienate people. Work is exhausting. It is difficult. You are spending a lot of time on work. As a result of which, there is now a new industry that has come up, leisure industry. Different entertainment industry has come up. So they are going with one another. You are working hard, you are getting exhausted, the leisure industry gives you some relief. But this relief is for a very temporary duration. Right? And this relief helps you get back to work again. So this work and leisure both are leading to alienation. Right? And you are just trying to pursue false needs through leisure. You're not able to go into that happy state, contented state. Leisure just relieves you till some point. Melvin Seaman says alienation has 5 components: meaninglessness, powerlessness, normlessness, isolation, self-restraint. All these things are happening. Right? There are norms don't exist, power, you don't have power. You are finding it difficult to find meanings in life. The last perspective by Robert Blommer. Robert Blommer says it is actually dependent on the level of technology. Not everywhere you have equal amount of alienation. In the past, right, when technology was less advanced, the alienation was less. For example, in handicraft industry, you are creating everything on your own. You have complete control over things. You have complete ownership over things. At that time, alienation was less. Over a period of time, with automation, over time with assembly line production, for example, car production, assembly line production, alienation increases. You are just one part. You're doing just one thing again and again. Someone else is doing something again and again. You don't have control over the process. Alienation increases. Again, with process industry, the alienation changes. So the idea here is, with technology, alienation varies. It doesn't remain the same. Now, the last part, how alienation is linked with COVID-19 pandemic, or how COVID-19 pandemic might have increased alienation. So I will try to understand it at a larger level. See what is happening, or what has happened in the last 2 years. Most likely you would have had work from home and other thing, right? So there was isolation. You are working somewhere, someone else is working somewhere for the same team, for the same department, for the same organization. So interaction with people is reducing. There's loneliness, and people might not be able to relate with the norms and values of the organization. What the organization is doing, what are the norms for it, it stands for. All these things people might not understand, especially for those people who have been recruited during the pandemic. They have never interacted, they have never been in that workplace. So they might not understand what is going on. I mean, they know the technical part maybe, but the larger goals of the organization, norms of the organization, the culture of the organization, they are not used to it. Can lead to some form of alienation. Apart from that, there was also flexibility in terms of work, right? You can work at this point of time. You did not have an 8 to 5 kind of work or 9 to 5 kind of work. So different people can work at different points of time. There was flexibility of work. So isolation and flexibility can lead to high level of stress, exhaustion, and feelings of emptiness. Can lead to state of helplessness. Right? Previously, everyone was working at the same time. You're meeting with one another. Even if you're not meeting, you know that this person will be available at this point of time and I can take help from this individual. But that might not be the case. You are working at a particular time. Someone else is working at some point of time. Maybe he or she will work today. Maybe he or she will not work today. There is dependence. So you are helpless. Right? So flexibility of work clubbed with isolation can lead to this. Apart from that, massive dependence on information communication technology. This can be a boon. It actually ensured that things were operating, things were functioning. But it also leads to distortion in information transfer. You might not get feedback for whatever inputs you are giving. You're working in the organization, but whether you're doing the right kind of thing, you don't know. Right? So all these things can have an impact on the meaning of work that you are carrying out. Right? On a day-to-day basis, if you are meeting your colleagues and seniors, etc., at workplace, they will give you information about your work. You will know where you are, what mistakes you're doing. You will also be congratulated if you're doing well. But that might be lacking. I mean, in work from home also, you will be given some appraisal, but it is not as same as working from home. As working in office. Apart from that, during the pandemic, the work conditions changed massively. Job insecurity increased. All these things could have led to an increase in alienation. Right? So during the pandemic, and in fact, now also things are more or less same. In some places, maybe people have changed the way you're working from home, or in some places already people have started working at office. Things might change, but maybe all these factors would have led to alienation at workplace. So with this, we'll wrap up the discussion on alienation. One question: do you think work alienation has increased due to the pandemic? Just give your answer. Right? So again, the points that we discussed: you can talk about it. First, talk about what is alienation, and then link alienation with all these things, right? During the pandemic, what happened in the economy, what happened to organizations, and how this would have had a bearing. So, with this, we will wrap up our discussion, and yeah, have a good weekend, whatever is remaining of it. Thank you.